They called him washed up, a walking relic, Hollywood's shadow, clinging to the scraps of old glory. Some didn't recognize him at all. Others pretended not to. But Sylvester Stallone never flinched at the arrogant challenge of the club's head coach. He signed the board, tightened his gloves, and waited. 3 minutes later, the loudest man in the room was on the floor, gasping, pride in pieces. If this moment sent shivers down your spine, drop a 1 in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay with us, because every quiet victory deserves to be seen, and every comeback begins right here. That morning in downtown Los Angeles was heavy with low clouds and the scent of old concrete after a light rain. Iron Forge sat tucked behind a fire station, across from a greasy spoon where cops still grabbed their morning coffee. It wasn't the kind of gym that cared about Instagram followers or brand sponsorships. The air inside reeked of sweat, tiger balm, and raw pride. The bags were stained, gloves frayed, mirrors warped just slightly. It was a place for the hungry, fighters clawing their way out of obscurity, and trainers who thrived on that desperation. Into this space stepped a 78-year-old man dressed like he'd time traveled. Gray hoodie with pushed-up sleeves, sagging sweatpants, sneakers so worn you could almost hear them whisper for retirement. No one noticed him, just another lost soul. Maybe somebody's grandfather trying to feel young again. Jessie sat behind the front desk, a college student with a sarcastic streak and AirPods jammed into her ears. She barely looked up when he entered. "Need a day pass. Senior discount applies automatically," she muttered, smirking as she slid a clipboard his way without making eye contact. He signed quietly, Michael Chapman. The name meant nothing to her. Stallone scanned the gym. Young men jumped rope, their movements crisp and cocky. Trainers shouted over heavy bass tracks. Phones caught everything in slow motion. Near the main ring, a crowd was gathering as Coach Brett Hawkins, muscular, tanned, and swaggering, lectured a group of eager amateurs in a voice built to demand attention. "Chin down, Logan, unless you like chewing leather," he barked, always 3 decibels too loud. Brett wasn't just loud. He was proud. The kind of guy who flexed during water breaks and wore compression gear, 2 sizes too small. He had the swagger of a man who saw his reflection more than his opponents. When Brett spotted Stallone shadow boxing quietly near the back mat, his eyes narrowed. He strutted over, towel around his neck, flanked by his usual crew of trainees, groupies, and TikTok wannabe fighters. "Hey, Pops!" he called out, loud enough to halt bag work across the gym. "You looking for lost and found? Or just reliving the days when boxing was still in black and white?" A few of the younger boxers chuckled. One wiry kid in USC gear added, "Somebody get this man a rocking chair and an oxygen tank." Another filmed from behind, a speed bag, whispering, "Yo, Rocky's back, straight from the nursing home." Stallone didn't flinch. He stayed focused on his imaginary opponent, pivoting smoothly, shoulders relaxed. The insults didn't stop. "I mean, really," Brett said, circling him. "This ain't Hollywood, Grandpa. No scripts here to make you look tough." Jessie joined the chorus, laughing as she posted a story labeled, "Legit just walked into Rocky cosplay." Brett stepped closer, mocking Stallone's stance. "You want to spar? You remember how to tie gloves? Or should we call paramedics ahead of time?" Another trainee giggled. "Don't throw your back out climbing into the ring." Stallone slowly raised his eyes and locked onto Brett's stare. There was no anger, no defensiveness, just weight, history. Brett mistook the silence for surrender and smirked. "Let's go then, old man," he said, clapping his gloves together. "One round, 3 minutes. Last 60 seconds, I'll buy you a milkshake and a recliner." Laughter rang across the gym. Jessie pulled out her phone. "We're live," she grinned. "This is going to be gold." The crowd closed in around the ring. Phones raised. Whispers swirled like fireflies. "That can't be him. He looks too tired." Someone murmured, "He's going to get destroyed." Another trainer muttered, "This feels like elder abuse." Still, Stallone stepped through the ropes slowly, knees popping faintly with each step. Brett bounced in the opposite corner, gloves high, flashing his trademark grin. His trunks read "Hawk" in bold silver embroidery across the waist. The bell rang. Brett came in hot, gloves snapping through the air with the speed and hunger of a man who knew eyes were watching. He fired a fast jab, doubled up, then launched a sharp left hook, clean and practiced. Stallone didn't counter. He slipped, weaved, slid. The gym buzzed with anticipation. "Come on, old man," Brett shouted. "This ain't ballroom dancing." He feinted, then shot a hard punch to Stallone's ribs, trying to humiliate him. It missed. Not by much, just enough. Stallone's footwork had carried him clear, like his body remembered a rhythm no one else could hear. His shoulders rolled, his stance adjusted. 30 seconds in, Brett's grin widened. He pressed harder, more combos, more pressure. "Fight back!" someone yelled. "He's scared to swing." But Tony, the old maintenance man turned ring assistant, watched silently from outside the ropes, his brow furrowed. "That's not beginner footwork," he whispered. Brett cocked his right arm again. A big swing. Too flashy. The kind of punch meant for cameras. That's when Stallone shifted his weight to his back foot, dropped low, and rotated his hips. His gloves snapped forward, short, sharp, brutal, landing flush beneath Brett's rib cage. Liver. The sound was subtle, a dull pop. But Brett gasped like the air had been vacuumed from his lungs. His knees buckled. He went down, right there on the canvas, face pale, clutching his side, eyes wide in shock. Phones dropped, mouths opened. Tony muttered, "That wasn't luck." A trainee whispered, "That was perfect." Jessie stood frozen, phone still recording, fingers trembling. The gym felt like a chapel. Stallone didn't speak, didn't smile. He stood still, breathing through his nose, gloves now lowered. Brett wheezed on the mat, pride crushed harder than bone. Tony climbed into the ring, looked at Brett, then back at Stallone. "You been training?" Stallone finally looked up. "A little." Tony turned to the stunned crowd. "You just got a master class in humility." He pointed to Stallone. "You mocked a man you didn't even recognize, and now you'll never forget him." The silence in the Iron Forge Boxing Club stretched, thick and suffocating, like a fog that refused to lift. Coach Brett Hawkins was still on one knee, one gloved hand pressed against his side as he tried to drag air back into his lungs. A minute ago, he had been the king of this ring, the loudest voice in the room, the self-anointed legend of a gym that thrived on ego. Now he looked like a man trying to remember which way was up. The room, once a cacophony of laughter and jeers, had gone utterly still. A few phones were still recording, but hands trembled, and faces lost their smugness. Brett blinked up at Stallone, who stood a few feet away, arms loose, breathing calm and even, like he'd just taken a casual stroll, not ended a man's pride with a single punch. Tony, the retired cut man who everyone dismissed as part of the gym's furniture, was crouched beside Brett now, hand on his shoulder, whispering something that sounded half like concern and half like disbelief. Brett tried to speak, but what came out was a breathless wheeze. Tony stood up, looked around the room, and said, "That right there, that wasn't just a liver shot. That was surgical." His voice wasn't raised, but every ear tuned in. Most of you wouldn't land that clean with 20 tries, and he did it after taking your garbage without saying a word. Stallone said nothing. He didn't pose, didn't flex. He just walked back to the corner, sat on the stool quietly, and removed his gloves slowly, precisely. The Velcro straps peeled apart like the unsealing of a truth everyone had ignored. Jessie stood at the edge of the ring, still holding her phone, staring like she was seeing something too big to name. Someone finally muttered, "Is that... that's really him, isn't it?" The realization spread like ripples. Some had known, or guessed, or dismissed it as impossible. Others never looked closely enough. But now they were connecting the dots. The voice, the footwork, the face under the hoodie that had changed with time, but not with presence. Tony finally broke the tension. He turned toward the crowd, hands on his hips. "Y'all just ran your mouths at Sylvester Stallone," he said plainly. "Yeah, that's Sylvester, the one who put boxing into Hollywood, the man who made a whole country us believe in comebacks." His eyes swept the group. "And y'all treated him like trash because of his shoes and his wrinkles." The weight of shame hit the room like a second punch. The group of trainees who had laughed the loudest now avoided eye contact. Brett's favorite protege, the one in the USC tank top, stared at the floor. One of the younger guys who had been filming turned off his phone without saving the clip. He couldn't bear the playback. Jessie stepped forward, her voice unsure. Why didn't you say who you were?" Stallone didn't look at her. He pulled off his hand wraps slowly, then finally spoke, his voice low and dry. "If I told you, you wouldn't have shown me who you really are." It landed heavier than the hook. Tony smirked, eyes still on Brett, who was now sitting up, his face pale, his ego shattered. "He didn't come in here looking for a show," Tony said. "He came to feel the mat under his feet again, to see if he still had it. And you all handed him the perfect test." Someone near the back spoke up, nervous. "Coach, you all right?" Brett raised a hand in a weak thumbs up, but his mouth stayed shut. The man who lived off attention had none left to give. The room exhaled as one, like everyone had been holding their breath. Stallone stood again, reached for his bag. His movements were slow but sure, not from exhaustion, but from age met with discipline. No flair, no rush, just a quiet exit in the making. As he stepped out of the ring, the crowd parted for him. No one dared crack a joke now. Some nodded, others stepped aside with murmured apologies. No one touched him. Tony walked beside him toward the lockers. "It's been, 10 years since you've been in a ring?" Stallone nodded. "Something like that." Tony shook his head. "You fight like time's afraid of you." Stallone chuckled, a quiet rasp of sound. "Time always wins, Tony, but some days you land the first punch." They walked into the hallway, the noise of the gym fading behind them, like a storm passed. Inside, the gym buzzed again, but differently. There was no laughter, no chest pounding. The mirrors reflected faces lost in thought. Even Jessie, now seated again at the desk, replayed the video quietly, watching every step, every slip, every pivot of the man she'd called Gramps just half an hour ago. Back in the locker room, Stallone sat on a bench and untied his shoes. Tony leaned against the wall. "You know, They're never going to forget that, he said. Not the punch, not the silence, not the way you made them all look small without saying a damn word. Stallone nodded, staring down at his laces. That wasn't my goal. No, Tony said, but it was the result. He paused. Brett's a prick sometimes. Been needing a dose of humility for years. You just gave him one no doctor could prescribe. Stallone stood slowly, grabbing his bag. He'll be all right. He's tough. Yeah, Tony nodded. But he ain't wise yet. Maybe now he'll get there. They stepped out into the hallway again. Brett was at the edge of the gym now, seated on a folding chair, an ice pack pressed to his ribs. His trainees hovered awkwardly nearby, unsure whether to comfort him or flee. When Stallone passed by, Brett looked up. His expression wasn't angry. It was haunted. You could have ended me, he rasped. You didn't. Stallone stopped. Didn't need to. Brett nodded slowly, as if absorbing something deeper than pain. You're the real deal. Stallone offered a faint smile. Always was. He stepped outside, the air brisk and gray, the sound of the city humming in the distance. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The gym behind him had changed. Not in paint or equipment, but in something more permanent. Stallone hadn't just landed a punch. He'd dismantled a culture of arrogance and noise with a single act of control. The lesson wasn't in the knockout. It was in the patience, the stillness, the refusal to play by their rules. And as he walked down the street, his old hoodie pulled up again. No one followed. No one called his name. But the world inside Iron Forge would never move the same way again. The video made its way online before sunset, quietly at first. No tags, no filters, no dramatic captions, just raw footage captured by one of the trainees who hadn't found it in himself to laugh. A minute 30 of footage that showed Sylvester Stallone, listed as Michael Chapman on the gym roster, stepping into a boxing ring, dodging punches like echoes, and delivering a single shot that dropped a man twice his age younger and 10 times louder. It wasn't flashy. There were no slow-motion edits, no motivational speeches laid over the top. It was clean, real, unfiltered, and it hit the internet like truth always does. Slowly, then all at once. By morning, it had spread through boxing forums, Reddit threads, and Facebook groups with names like Old School Iron and Fighters Over 50. The comments poured in. That man is a master. Didn't throw a punch until he had to. Respect. I grew up watching Rocky. I never thought I'd see him remind the world that he's more than just a movie. Within hours, someone traced the original post back to Iron Forge. Local news picked it up. A reporter called the gym for comment, but no one wanted to speak on record. They didn't need to. The footage spoke for itself. Back inside the Iron Forge, the tone had shifted. Not artificially, not like someone had made an announcement or pinned up a memo, but something had cracked open. The next day, the usual cocky routines were muted. The locker room was quieter. Young fighters nodded more, listened better. Jessie kept her eyes up and her phone down. Tony was back in the corner, folding towels, but now everyone knew to listen when he muttered under his breath. The USC kid, Logan, didn't post a single selfie that morning. Even Brett, still stiff and bruised, walked in slower, his voice lower. He wasn't ashamed exactly, but there was something stripped from him now, something performative that had been peeled away by the weight of reality. He'd gotten a wake-up call, and the bruise under his rib cage wasn't just physical. It was truth-colored. The members weren't the only ones feeling the aftermath. A few older men came in that week, men who had followed Stallone's career, men who remembered the Rocky premiere like it was yesterday. They didn't ask for autographs. They didn't gawk. They just moved quietly around the gym, respectful, watchful, as if trying to absorb whatever trace of discipline he might have left behind in the air. One of them, a retired bus driver named Carl, put his gloves on for the first time in 20 years. "If that old man still moves like that," he said softly, "then I got no excuse." Stallone never returned to the gym. He didn't need to. He wasn't there for redemption or revenge. He hadn't gone in to prove anything to anyone. It was simpler than that. A man with a life behind him, a history carved in sweat and tape and silence, had walked back into the space that once defined him. Not to be seen, but to feel, to remember, to listen for the rhythm in his feet and the echo of his breath against canvas, to see if the body could still speak the language of power and control and grace. And it had, perfectly. Back at his apartment in West Hollywood, the days passed without much fuss. Stallone read the paper. He walked early in the morning when the streets were still soft with quiet. He didn't bother checking his name online. He hadn't needed a crowd in decades. But one afternoon, Tony showed up with a brown paper bag and a sheepish look on his face. Stallone raised an eyebrow at the knock. "Didn't think you knew where I lived," he said. Tony shrugged. "Didn't?" Asked around. "I owed you a beer." Stallone opened the door and waved him in. They sat at the kitchen table, the beer bottles cold, the silence comfortable. Tony looked around. "You live simple." Stallone nodded. "Always did. Just hit it better before." They talked. Not about the fight, not directly. They talked about the old circuit, about names that were gone now, gyms that had turned into apartment buildings, and the smell of leather, and pine oil, and sweat. Tony laughed when Stallone reminded him of a spar in Philly, a kid who thought he was Tyson reincarnated. "You remember all this?" Tony asked. Stallone tapped his temple. "The punches you take, they fade. But the ones you don't, the ones you slip, those stay." Tony leaned back, beer in hand. "You could open a place again, you know. Teach. Mentor." Stallone smiled faintly. "The ones who want to learn won't mock first. That's how you know they're ready." Back at Iron Forge, the video played on a loop on the office monitor. Brett never turned it off, not out of masochism, but to remind himself. Each time he watched, he noticed something new. The angle of Stallone's stance, the timing of his breath, the way he never once looked rushed or angry. It wasn't strength that beat him. It was clarity, the calm in the storm. Brett started running quieter drills, less flash, more focus. He started telling his trainees, "Forget the noise, find the stillness. That's where the real fighters live." Jessie finally pulled the video down. Not because it wasn't viral, but because she didn't want it turned into a meme. "It wasn't funny," she told Logan when he asked. "It was humbling." Logan nodded. "Yeah, it changed me." And it had. It changed all of them. Not in the way people often claim, quickly, performatively, like slapping a hashtag on an apology, but subtly, like iron under heat, bent, reshaped. The gym that had once echoed with bravado now felt grounded, centered. The same mirrors reflected quieter eyes. The same ring now carried weight, not just sweat. One afternoon, Brett gathered the crew near the bags. He cleared his throat, glanced around. "I was a fool," he said. "I let pride blind me. That man walked in here looking for peace. We gave him mockery, and he answered with discipline, not ego. That's the standard now. That's what Iron Forge will be." Nobody clapped. They just nodded. And in a frame on the wall behind the front desk, Jesse had quietly printed out a still image from the video. Not the punch, not the fall, but the moment just before, when Stallone's eyes locked on Brett's shoulders, body low, gloves still at his waist. The caption read, "Respect doesn't shout. It waits." Weeks passed, people came and went. New fighters joined, some left. But the gym stayed different, sharper, cleaner, more honest. Every now and then, someone would ask, "You think he'll come back?" The answer was always the same. He doesn't need to. Because what he left behind wasn't a story. It was a standard. Sylvester Stallone didn't knock out a man. He knocked out the arrogance of a room that forgot what greatness really looked like. And as long as that ring stayed grounded in humility, in the silence after a perfect shot, in the lesson of patience over pride, then he never really left. And no one at Iron Forge would ever forget the day an old man walked through their doors and taught them how to fight with dignity.